Those of you watching on the Salem News Channel, a look at downtown Milwaukee. Great city, by the way. Visited it last year on a beautiful spring weekend. Took in a Brewers game. That's a good time. I recommend. I'm a casual baseball fan, and I will tell you one of the great places to go watch a baseball game, just a great vibe for baseball, a Brewers game. I recommend it. Anyway, I got a post on X today from Mike. Getting a lot of questions today. I like that. Means you're engaged. Smartest audience in all of radio and streaming. And Mike says, is it possible to get a legal expert on the show this week to educate us on why it is taking the Supreme Court so long to deal with these judge issues? Thank you. Love the show. Mike, I happen to have a legal expert on the show, but I don't think I need his help for this one because I think I'm going to get this right, but he can correct me if I'm wrong. Simple answer is I think the Supreme Court is loath to get into this because they want it to go through the regular appeals process and kind of go through the regular rules of order rather than just sound off on this thing, smack these judges down and move on, because that's not the way. They like the traditional operating standard of business, which is appeals and weeks and blah and months and la. We have urgency the Supreme Court doesn't necessarily share. I think I'm right on that, but what does Brad Schimmel think? He happens to be a judge in Wisconsin. He'd like to be the next Supreme Court judge in Wisconsin, as a matter of fact. There's a huge election going on there, and he was good enough to make time for us this morning. Judge, it's a real thrill to have you on the show, sir. Good morning.
Thanks, Chris. Great to be back with you again. You're spot on. For the U.S. Supreme Court, same thing with the Wisconsin Supreme Court. They can draw a case directly up to them, but it's something they don't like to do because it's better to let the issues develop in the lower courts. The lawyers can file some briefs. The judges there can examine evidence and affidavits, do that in a more deliberate way so that by the time the case gets to the Supreme Court, the issues will be more narrowed, they'll be identified, the evidence will be more focused. That's the preferred way to do it. Sometimes it's urgent and you have to pull it right up, but I think on this one, they're probably going to take their time. And this is a huge legal issue. We've been looking at this question for many years. When I was Attorney General now, a decade ago, we were dealing with where liberals went to judges they chose in certain districts where they knew they were going to be guaranteed a very liberal judge. And they bring their cases there. They get these nationwide injunctions from that local district court. And we've been waiting a long time to get this answered. It's a big legal issue that the Supreme Court needs to get it right.
And I was reading earlier this morning in an Axios piece, Judge. It's funny because they just sort of state it, and I had never really stopped to consider it before. Here's the quote. In the old days, district courts' rulings only applied to the parties before them. But since the beginning of the Obama administration, those judges have become increasingly willing to say their rulings apply nationwide. When did that change on a dime? Who gets to just say my rulings now apply nationwide? I never thought to ask that question before.
It's the danger with when you have judges that are appointed for life, that they may not necessarily feel particular limits on their power, and they may stretch their power and wait to see if higher courts will reverse them. That's part of the problem. There are positives and negatives to appointing judges versus electing them.
Do you believe that to be activism? I mean, if we're going to, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but if we're going to be consistent, is that both, Trump or Republican appointed judges and Democrat appointed judges, meaning these district court judges need to stay in their lane, rule on the parties before them, and that's where it should stay. If we're going to be consistent, right? That's the conservative position, constitutional position.
That's the normal way, is lower court judges rule for the parties before them. The higher courts, the Supreme Courts in the states and at the national level, they're law developing courts. They decide these bigger issues like this, what presidential powers exist or what are the limitations on the president's powers. And then this big question, do district courts have the power to issue nationwide stays, to do things that go beyond just the litigants in front of them that day? This is a question that the United States Supreme Court needs to answer. And like I said, they need to make sure they get this one right, because the implications either way are going to be very big for our nation's future.
Brad Schimmel was the former Attorney General in Wisconsin. He now serves as a county judge in Waukesha County, and he's running to be the next Supreme Court justice in Wisconsin in what has been probably one of the most closely watched and contentious Supreme Court races in a state since my home base of Pennsylvania. We had a very, very similar, hotly contested, moneyed Supreme Court race.
Yeah.
The constitutional conservative justice lost that race because of outsized influence of outside money. My understanding about your race, Judge Schimmel, is that it's much tighter, even though there is a lot of outside money from the left pouring into your opponent. True?
Yes, it is. And I've been, part of that is I've been campaigning on the ground very hard for 16 months now. I've gone to all 72 counties in our state. I've been approaching voters for all of this time, every weekend, almost every weeknight during this whole 16 months. And I've reached a lot of voters, and I think they see through all this. They're also seeing things that don't make sense to them. My opponent will say certain things that about my position on criminal cases, for instance, but then they'll see that literally 99% of law enforcement in the state is supporting me. And people are scratching their heads and saying, wait a minute, if this guy doesn't take care of crime victims, why is all of law enforcement in Wisconsin supporting him? They're seeing through this. They're seeing through the lies. They're seeing through the money. My opponent has now spent $20 million on television ads against me. That's just her campaign. And this will be it is now already the most expensive court race in American history. It's anticipated this may approach $100 million by the time it's done. My opponent is raking in donations from George Soros and J.B. Pritzker and all of these huge outside billionaire donors. In fact, our last campaign report, almost 50% of her donors don't vote in the state of Wisconsin. 97% of my donors do vote in Wisconsin.
That would raise the question for many people who maybe don't follow this as closely. Why are outside moneyed interests like a J.B. Pritzker or a George Soros, why are they pouring so much money into a candidate on a state Supreme Court race? What is that about? Can you explain that for folks?
I can. The Wisconsin is the swingiest of swing states, right? We're the narrowest one in America for tipping back and forth between blue and red. And my opponent went out and promised that if she got on the campaign trail, she was going to engage in congressional map redistricting, which would result in, she said, 2 Republican congressional seats turning Democrat. That's the danger on the national level, because you take out 2 Republican congressional districts, turn them Democrat, and suddenly now you have at the national level, President Trump doesn't have any majority behind him. So these national billionaire liberal donors are jumping in to help with this because they see a great opportunity to change not just Wisconsin politics, but American politics.
Brad Schimmel, the former Attorney General of Wisconsin. He is now a Waukesha County judge, and he's running to be the next Supreme Court justice in Wisconsin. I know a little something about this, Judge. In Pennsylvania, we saw the left-wing Supreme Court of Pennsylvania just outright take away the legislature's ability to redistrict the map, and they just did it. They just took it over and did it, which there's no constitutional precedent for it. That's exactly what they want to do in Wisconsin.
Yeah, that's their playbook. They already did it with our state legislative maps. So they flipped those around. They took, in the maps that got approved after our Supreme Court just a year and a half ago, struck down the maps that were already in place, already approved by the courts. They reversed that earlier decision from 2 years earlier, flipped it around, and they ended up putting 30-some Republican incumbents, pitted them in the same district against each other. That's how far they went to take political control. And they are working their way through a political agenda. Just like you saw in Pennsylvania, this is the new left playbook, because they can't win with their ideas at the ballot box. If they tell people what they want to do legislatively, people don't support it. So they can't win there. So instead, they're going after the courts, and they'll legislate from the courts. And there's no appeal, because in Wisconsin, the final say on what Wisconsin statutes mean The final say on what the Wisconsin Constitution says lies with the Wisconsin Supreme Court. There's no way to go challenge that anywhere. They feel that power and they're exercising, they're abusing it.
The Wisconsin Supreme Court race is what we're talking about. The date is specifically, Election Day is specifically April 1st, but last Tuesday, as I understand, early voting is now underway. You can go vote. If you're listening to me today in Wisconsin and you want to vote for Brad Schimmel, they can do it today, right, Judge?
Yes, already tens of thousands of voters, maybe it might be in the hundreds of thousands by now, of voters have already gone and cast their ballots. And, in Wisconsin, I'm sure you've experienced this in Pennsylvania. On Election Day in the spring, you could very well have a blizzard. We all could be holding a snow shovel that morning. Anything could happen. We're encouraging people to get out, get your vote banked, get it done. It's secure. We know it. You won't miss out on Election Day.
And Susan Crawford, your opponent,
yeah.
her background is what exactly? What should people know about her? We know what you've done. We know you've been the Attorney General, so you've won statewide. How about her?
Well, she's a Dane County Circuit Court judge. She's in our most liberal county in the state. Some call it Berkeley East. It is very, very wildly liberal there. When she was before she was a circuit court judge, she was in private practice in our state's go-to law firm, where you go to sue on conservative reforms. So she's the attorney who went after our voter ID law. She's the attorney who went after conservative reforms like one we call Act 10 here. Now, when she ran for Dane County Circuit Court judge in that very liberal county, she bragged about being the attorney going after those things. Now she claims, well, I'll be objective. Don't worry about me. This is how liberals always do it. They always run like they're a centrist. They're a moderate. I'm just running for law and order. But that's not how they rule when they get in office. People need to be careful. Don't fall prey to her lies. Look at her actual history. You'll find out she's an extreme partisan leftist, and she will be dangerous for our state. She is the handpicked choice of the current liberal majority to replace the liberal justice who's retiring. She will fill out their hand to keep going through this political agenda they've been going through.
Wisconsin, save yourselves. I know a little something about this in Pennsylvania. Save yourselves, Wisconsin. Vote Brad Schimmel April 1st, but you can go vote right now. Judge, it is a pleasure to have you on today, sir. Good luck in your campaign.
Thank you so much, Chris.
The Chris Stigall Show podcast.